Welcome. When I was working as a consultant, some of my favorite projects were with sales groups, helping them meet sales and marketing goals. I liked working with them because they had no tolerance for consultants or training that wasted their time, and they knew what their time was worth. We created training and performance support systems for them. We conducted evaluations of product launches for them. A lot of this work that we conducted then would now be called part of sales enablement. Our guest today is Mike Kunkle, who has deep expertise in sales enablement. We're delighted he can join us. And a special shout out to Lenz, who brought this opportunity to my attention and worked with Mike and me so we could make it happen. Mike, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks, Lenz. And for those of you who are here live, thanks for joining. For those of you who are listening on a recording, thanks for listening. We're going to talk about how to start or evolve a sales enablement function that truly delivers results. And to Steve's point, when you work with in the sales function, that is the thing that matters. And it is one of the easier places in terms of assessing ROI to determine when you're actually moving that needle. So let me start off with a little story about sales training that really relates to this, because I sold B2C and B2B. I carried a bag, as they say. I was a sales manager for a couple of companies, and then I got into sales training. I had actually taken over a poor performing branch sales office, and we had increased sales results 600% year over year. And they said to me, wow, can you teach other people to do that? I didn't know anything really at the time about training and development. So I just said, yeah, absolutely. And, I knew I'd figure it out. And so I threw myself into it. I read everything I could get my hands on. I talked to as many people as I could. I didn't go to many conferences in those days, but I hunted down people that spoke at them and talked to them offline sometimes. And what I figured out very early on is the things that I was doing as a sales trainer in and of themselves were not moving the needle. And so I started to listen to these people who were talking about this weird thing called human performance technology, or HTP, or eventually performance consulting, in organization development and organization behavior. And they were thinking about systems. They were thinking about process and systems and methodology and tools and performance support and things beyond the small slice of training that, when you could get them working together, would really move the needle. So my first sales training course, it did move the needle for the people who were taking it when they left the course and went back to their jobs for a brief period of time. And we see them skyrocket, and then we'd see it round off and kind of head back down to the average. And I wondered why that was. And so I go out into the field, and I'm talking to the managers, and I'm talking to the people that I trained and the other account executives in the office. And what was happening was the managers, who didn't know a thing about the training that we were delivering, or really not the details of it or how to reinforce it, were actually pulling these people back into doing the things the way that they had always been done, rather than the newer ways that we were training in this onboarding program. And that really hit me like a ton of bricks, that you can't just train people and expect to move the needle if you're not engaging managers, if you're not creating performance systems. And so that took me from thinking like a sales trainer, even though for years after that, my title generally had the word sales training in it, to trying to think like a performance consultant. And that's what our plan is going to be today. We're going to talk about how to take stock of your current situation if you want to start or evolve a sales enablement function inside your organization. What does your company need? Where are you today? Who are the cross-functional stakeholders you should be working with? And then we're going to take action and show you how you can work with something I call the building blocks of sales enablement, create charters and phased projects to really get aligned and get in gear around this thing called sales enablement, to close gaps, to put foundations in place, and get to what we call a formal maturity model, and then prioritize your approaches, or learn how to do that, to make the impact and pick up low-hanging fruit along the way. Then where it gets fun for me is we're going to talk about then taking the leap into performance consulting. Once you have this foundation, how do you evolve it to become like a performance consultant and really a detective who's going in and diagnosing, doing root cause analysis, solving problems, designing solutions, and becoming a needle mover, if you will. And then we'll wrap up the question at the end with your questions, talk about some next steps. And if you have questions along the way, feel free to yell out, raise your hand. Lens is going to be watching for those, and will alert me if I miss them with all the things that I'm looking at here. So that's our plan for today. Now, the next thing I want to do is scare you with this. It's always fun when a presenter says how to survive this presentation, right? So, but when Steve and Lens and I talked about what might be most interesting or helpful to this group of folks who'd be joining us or watching the recording, we decided that we were going to give you as much value as possible in stuff to dig into and chew on. So this is not going to be one of those Steve Jobs presentations where I show a couple of pictures and we have a nice discussion. This deck is really built and meant to be a resource for you. There's a lot of information that we're going to cover today, and I'm going to break every presentation rule, and I'm going to break every rule that you ever learned about how to present information or learning and development especially. This is meant to be a resource and something to dig in. So go big picture. Try to make a dot connection here or there to something back in your world. Ask questions if you've got them. Make notes though about where do you want to dive deeper, because you'll have the opportunity on the registration page to download these slides and keep them. My gift to you for Steve and Len's having me here today. Review the slides, go back and look at your notes, dig into a big appendix that we're not even going to get to today, and then use this as the impetus to continue to learn and grow and figure out what things will be most helpful to you. So that's my advice and why we're chock full here today. So let's dig right into the content and take stock with something I call a situation assessment. The first question that I guide sales enablement or wannabe sales enablement leaders is to ask themselves why they are taking this journey. And we'll talk about these building blocks of sales enablement that you see here. Don't worry too much about the details now. But on the right side, there are maturity models of enablement, like there are for many things in organizational science. Sometimes there's no enablement happening in a company. Sometimes it's random. It's highly reactive. Their knees are flying all over the place and bouncing off foreheads, and they're not really accomplishing much in terms of moving the needle. Then it starts to get informal, but some things are coming together. This formal maturity level that you see here has been proven in multiple different research studies that when you get to this point, it actually starts to have an impact on sales performance. And this is where I think of it as these building blocks that we'll talk about, where you start to have a strategic, structured, systemic, and scalable framework in place. That means this is how we do sales enablement and how we're moving the needle for sales. Now, there is a level beyond that. That's adaptive. And really, this is when we start to layer performance consulting principles on top of the sales enablement foundation in place. And we'll talk about that in the final section. The second question I ask them to think about is who's going on this journey with you? Who are your internal stakeholders for sales enablement? Who do you need to collaborate with cross-functionally, and which functions, which roles, and which specific people? And I joke, anyone who's old enough to remember Pink Floyd, right? They had a song about the bricks in the wall. And so I think of this as sort of the bricks in the wall or the cross-functional collaboration that you can do. And, this is an example. Right? Not everyone is going to have, for example, a demand generation group in marketing. They might just call it marketing. They may not specifically have content marketing, but these are the groups generally that you work with cross-functionally in sales enablement. So it requires some real alignment. So figure out who is going with you on this journey, along with why exactly are you taking it. And then you need to figure out where are you today and what's the destination. Now, complex chart here, but follow the numbers. In the upper left, number one, Some general background information. Who sells what to whom and how? What's the strategic objectives for the sales organization right now? And what are their go-to-market tactical plans? Then you can start to assess what's their current state. What challenges do they have? What opportunities can they enable? And what are the impacts of those challenges and opportunities? Then if you leap over to the right side to the desired future state, what outcomes are they looking for and how would they prioritize those outcomes? Well, that allows you to go into the middle and say, okay, what's the gap between my current state and that desired future state? How big is it? What are the impacts of the gap? And you can do a needs and gap analysis. The needs would be, what are the things that will help you bridge that gap? What capabilities are required to do that? And if you do that, how big is the gain from point A to point B? That will allow you eventually to start building a business case because you can say, we need to spend X to get there. It will solve this problem that we currently have, get us these outcomes, and you can calculate ROI. Not an exact science in business, of course, but you can start to put a plan together to put a business case in place, determine a budget that you need, get support for that budget, and then start to build your department over time. This is a simpler way to think about that more complex chart. Current state, desired future state, the challenges, opportunities, impacts, needs, outcomes, and priorities on the bottom, and then conducting that gap and impact analysis. This stuff is so simple, at least in theory and concept, but I can't tell you how many times I don't see this in action out in organizations where they're either running a sales enablement function or thinking about starting one. This is something that we have stolen, I'll say borrowed, Steve, right? It's something I've borrowed from performance consulting principles that applies so well to everything that we do in either training and development, organization development, sales enablement, change management, you name it. So what's the bottom line here? Take stock with that situation assessment. Why are you taking the journey? Who's going with you? Where are you now? Where are you headed? What's the gap and impact analysis between those two and the compelling business case that will take you there? If you start from this, you will earn the respect of the executives in the company. And as you start to produce results, this is the thing that starts to help you earn that mythical seat at the table that we talk about so often. So with that foundation of how do I think about getting started, let's talk about how to take action with the blocks, a charter, and phased plans. This, coming back to it, are the sales enablement building blocks. And there's an appendix with even more detail. And for anyone really interested in digging in, I've got a book on this topic. You can see the link here, but you can find it easily on Amazon. The Building Blocks of Sales Enablement goes into this in great detail. But as an overview, I'll just give you a tour through the blocks. There are 12 in the middle, 12 blocks in the middle, and the top 3 are buyer acumen, buyer engagement content, and sales support content. And buyer acumen, probably one of the more important things that we could do because it's building an understanding of who are your buyers and your customers. And that coin up that we talked about earlier, challenges, opportunities, impacts, needs, outcomes, and priorities. If you understand those things for your buyers in your market, that gives you a really solid foundation for how to approach them, how to sell to them, how to message to them, how to solve their problems. Buyer engagement content is content, whether it be collateral, webinars, case studies, whatever you might put together that can help either attract the right buyers to you, people who have problems that you can solve and the means and desire to solve them, or it could help them as they're moving through a sales process, make decisions whether they want to keep going with you or whether they need to step away because it's not the right solution for their problem. So it helps them decide along the way and make purchase decisions. Sales support content then is the content that you develop for the sales force to help remind them of all of the things that they need to do related to buyer acumen, buyer engagement content, and the other things on the building blocks. Second
Mike,
row is,
sorry, you said we could
yes,
jump in, so I'm using that.
jump in, yeah.
Yeah, hi, my name's Admir, and I'm a senior learning designer. This is very timely. We're having a sales enablement project in my company. Let me just make sure I'm reading your model here correctly. Is it kind of a systematic process where you first gather the buyer acumen, then you move into the buyer engagement content, and then into the support content, or is it one kind of process and you do all three of those activities all at once?
These are all separate blocks that we're going to talk in a moment, that we're going to use that current state, future state, and force field analysis to assess which ones are good enough for now and which ones you need to spend time on. So right now, what I'm doing is just sharing the model and the framework itself. Then we'll talk about how do I determine where do I start, because there's a lot of stuff here, right? So it's not intended to be a step-by-step model. Second row, hiring, training, and coaching, things that we're relatively familiar with. Third, sales process, sales methodology, and analytics and metrics. If you don't work in the sales field, process is you're probably familiar with, but it's really the stages that a sale moves through. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and the names vary. In each stage of that process, there's generally a stage name. There are objectives for that process, tasks that need to be performed, and exit criteria, which is just a geeky term that means what are the things that have to be complete in that process stage to move forward. The methodology is in each of those stages. What is the sales rep doing? How are they interacting with the buyer? How are they selling? So the process or the stages it moves through, and the methodology, or how are the reps selling to the buyers in each of those stages. The analytics and metrics, of course, are around all sorts of KPIs or critical success factors. How many prospects or exist at any given time, how many deals are in each stage of the pipeline. If they're doing account management, how many accounts do they have? What are the objectives of those accounts? What's the growth curve look like? Right, so all sorts of analytics and metrics. And analytics and metrics can also apply to other things in other blocks here. So, the ROI of training could be something that you analyze. So all sorts of analytics and metrics. The last row of the central blocks, sales technology and tools. What's the technology like CRM or sales enablement tools or other sales tech stack tools in place? What's your sales compensation and incentive and reward and recognition systems that you have in place? And this last block could probably be as big as all of the others put together, and that's sales manager enablement. Very often in organizations, we miss enabling the frontline sales managers. And today we're doing a lot more to enable the frontline sales reps, but we still very often give the sales managers a couple of days of onboarding and a kick in the behind and say, go get them, Tiger. And if you want to get the best possible results from your sales force, like the story I told at the very beginning, your managers need to be engaged, empowered, and enabled as well. So sales manager enablement's a very important block. Now, outside of those core blocks, there's systems thinking and communication. The systems thinking are really, how are you going to tie these things together and create systems that support these blocks in the execution of them in your organization? The communication is two parts. Sales enablers generally tend to be the people in the organization who do the communication officially to the sales force, or at least in the formal maturity model or mature sales enablement organizations. Because rather than have communication coming from all these different ways to the sales force in different formats and different language and stored in different places, which can be chaotic and confusing, A lot of organizations are now starting to funnel their communication through sales enablement. The information is communicated in the same formats so that it's easier to find or read it. Maybe it's info mapped. It's stored in some place where they can retrieve it and search it. So if they miss a particular update, they know where to go to find it. And the other thing is with communication is that cross-functional communication. When I talked about those bricks in the wall and the various other functions that you work with, ensuring good ongoing communication between these functions. Now, remember that when we get to talking about the charter, because that's going to be a big part of that. And the last thing is something that not all organizations do, but many do what I call sales support services. So imagine if you're a company that responds a lot to RFPs. Well, maybe your sales operations team helps your sales team respond to those RFPs so the sellers aren't having to respond to all of them on their own. Or maybe you offer coaching services, or maybe you help your sales reps. They can put in a request to have someone help them build some decks, some slide decks or presentations. Right? So there may be various services that you provide. Another common one is referred to as a deal desk. Imagine you have a very big, very strategic, very important deal in a pipeline that you absolutely want to win as an organization. Well, a deal desk would be people that assemble to strategize and help that sales rep win that deal or that opportunity, hence the term deal desk. That's what sales support services means. And here are the building blocks in its entirety, in case you want to print this off and wallpaper a room with it in your office or home. Okay, so let's talk about this charter thing. You know, before this term popped up in the term sales enablement popped up, I used to just think of this as my departmental strategic plan. It's just really about getting clarity, establishing priorities, setting expectations with people, and creating aligned plans. So it starts with the why again. Why are you starting a revolving enablement function? How are you going to define sales enablement? Because as annoying as this is, there is no common definition of sales enablement that applies in every single organization. Very often it is about training and tools and content, but it, as you can see from the building blocks, it can include so much more than that. If you're starting, where will you start? If you're adding or evolving your department, how is that going to go? What roles will you support? Account executives, account managers, SDRs or sales development reps, business development reps, somewhat of an interchangeable term there. Sales engineers who support the sellers for complex tech products, perhaps your frontline sales managers, maybe as channel partners, or it could even be someone else. In many organizations now, you'll hear the term revenue enablement. I'm not fond of that term, but generally it's used and meant to be, you're also enabling people in marketing and customer success or customer service in addition to people in sales. I think you can do that no matter what you call yourself, right? But very often they refer to that now as revenue enablement. So which building blocks then will you support? This gets to your question, Admir. More coming on that. What issues or performance problems are existing currently that you want to address? And then what outcomes are you aiming to deliver? Then you have to figure out the who, right? Because if you're going to be working with marketing and product marketing and the CFO, and you're going to be working with content marketing or demand generation and sales operations or RevOps, there's a lot of people in this mix that you want to be sure you're aligned. Who's doing what? So very often I recommend that sales enablement get involved with hiring. They're not responsible typically for hiring. That would generally be an HR group, right? But you cross-functionally collaborate to ensure that you're able to hire the most appropriate candidates to put the right people in the right seats on the bus. It's especially challenging in sales roles. Sales is a little like the Olympic athletes of business or the astronaut rate stuff, right? The astronauts of corporations. So very often, if you're hiring, especially someone who needs to be what they refer to as a hunter, someone who goes and brings in new business, takes a very specialized skill set and the right type of makeup. So that's an example of how you could cross-functionally collaborate. You're not going to be doing all of the hiring and sales enablement. You're going to work with the sales team and HR and any others that need to be involved to ensure that the process for hiring is effective. And that would be one of the systems of systems thinking, right? The sales hiring system. So who's going to do that? And who will you collaborate with? And then lastly, it gets to the how. How will this work be done? To what level are you going to do it? Excuse me just a moment. Thank you. Who's going to do it? How are you going to prioritize it? How will you measure it? And how will you collaborate and communicate with your internal partners and report some results? Hey, I see some chats coming in there. Uh, Shelley, yeah, so true about manager enablement, right? And sales support services, learn more at apmp.org. Thank you for adding that, Vicki. Okay, so now you've gone through this whole process, and then based on your staffing, your budget, and your charter, you can start to answer some of these questions. Which of the building blocks will you support? How are you going to sew them together with systems thinking? What level of sales support services will you provide, if any? It starts to come together. We're going to bring it together even a little bit more, but this is where it starts to make sense. Now, I've heard that you have learned about or use force field analysis. This is something you probably know that came out of Kurt Lewin's work in the 40s. And I actually built an entire consulting company around this at one point earlier in my career, because the concept is so simple, powerful, and underutilized. In this work, I start with an objective in the upper left-hand corner, put in the analysis from what's the current state, put in my desired future state analysis, usually in a SMART goal of some sort, but at least getting some goals and outcomes specified. And when you do that, you can do that based on the sources of forces. Now, this isn't something that was one of Lewin's terms. This is something I sort of adapted, right? When you're doing a force field analysis, sometimes you can just take a big whiteboard or a piece of paper and start brainstorming and dumping stuff out. But at some point, people either at the beginning or after that, some brainstorming, they get a little stuck as to what else do I need to get out there. I have found that the sources of forces can help people target a bit. And so I would say, hey, that situation assessment that you did in the gap and impact analysis, what stuff there should we be talking about? And then building block by building block, you can actually do a force field analysis based on each building block. I actually recommend doing this, right? There are 15 blocks in all. I recommend doing a mini force field analysis on each block with its own current state and desired future state. Now, Admir, this is where it really comes together, where it can help you prioritize where do I start in all of that mix of blocks. Because if you're saying, hey, you know what, we are really short on buyer acumen. We don't really know. We internally built our personas, but we didn't go out and research or pay someone to research or really understand our market. That'd be an important place to start. But let's say you've got that locked up, great buyer engagement content, really good sales support content, but your hiring has not been very effective. You have a high degree of turnover. People take long to ramp up. Then you could start to say, well, current state of hiring is this. This is where we need it to be. And now suddenly you've got a gap. Now, as you know about force field analysis, once you get those sources of forces thought through, you can say, well, what are the things in each one of those forces that are driving me forward toward the goal I want to achieve in the objective in the upper right-hand corner? And what are the things that are holding me back from getting there? And then once you get those put in the form, you can start to weight them and say, and what would I estimate? This is generally subjective, but what would I estimate the weighting of these forces to be. And that is really the concept of the force field analysis. I think of it like you're sitting in a race car and you've got 1 foot on the gas pedal and 1 foot on the brake, and you're pushing on both, and you're just sitting there, the car would just be rocking in place, right? That's what a force field analysis is like. And so we're going to come back and talk more about that and how to turn this into an actionable plan in just a minute, because this is part of, but not the only way, that we'll start to prioritize the initiatives. This is a chart that you won't absorb right here today. Think of it in 3 big columns: strategy, tactics, execution, and talent will be part of the execution. I try to get people to think through this because what I very often see is they'll do an analysis of a problem. They won't get quite to the root cause. They're really sort of at the symptoms, but they start throwing solutions at it to fix it. This is sort of that random maturity model that we talked about way back in the maturity models. So often they start trying to fix the stuff on the right side without dealing with the dependencies to those things on the left. So I show this to them and I say, look, this is one thing you can do to help get a sense of your current state, desired future state, and the dependencies that you have to get in place. Now, we could debate top to bottom whether things have to be done in these exact orders. Not necessarily, but from left to right, you need to get the strategy stuff right, or at least what I call GEFN, G-E-F-N, good enough for now. You have to get those to be good enough for now so that you can move to the middle and get those, as best you can, or at least good enough for now so you can move one more to the right. So if you look at this chart and you do this or include this in your force field analysis, and again, it's another tool to just help you prioritize. Even the building blocks themselves can help you prioritize what's there, what's not. Of the stuff that's there, what's GEFN or good enough for now, what's not. And then based on the strategic objectives for that year, what your sales leader and CEO and other executives want to achieve, right? What's urgent, what's important, and you can start to put things in an order over a time frame. Another way to think about prioritization is, if you remember current state and desired future state, we said in the middle were the needs, and the needs were bridging the gap between the current and future state. So if you do that impact analysis that we talked about, and this is key, if you dollarize that, if we move from here to here, what will it mean in real dollars to the company? I once had a sales rep who was selling a solution, and I listened to the discovery, and I heard them get to the point where the customer said, yes, we really need a 3% improvement in X. And what the rep never did in that call, and we coached them to do later, to go back and get, what does that 3% mean in terms of real dollars? In this case, unbelievably, it was about $3 million. Now, it makes a whole lot better business case than to say, oh, we need a 3% improvement, right? You can use that same logic when you're building your business case and doing your impact outcomes analysis here and thinking about coin op. Again, in this section, I'm just giving you some ideas about various ways and tools you can use to prioritize. The goal being, back to force field analysis, when you do this driving and restraining force analysis, the way that you actionalize this is you ask the question, what can I do to reduce or eliminate the restraining forces? And then what can I do to strengthen or add driving forces? Now, the reason I start with reducing or restraining, if you're sitting in that car, 1 foot on the brake, 1 foot on the gas, and you want to lurch forward as quickly as possible, what makes the most sense? Push harder on the gas or take your foot off the brake? Off the brake, right? So I start with trying to reduce or eliminate the things that are stopping us from moving forward. And very often in sales organizations or organization work in general, sometimes there are things that just aren't known, that are knowable, but you don't know them yet, that are gaps. And I put those gaps of knowledge in as a restraining force. And then part of resolving that gap would be go get the answer, right? Go find out who you need to talk to in that area. Go get some data or research. Do a little analysis about the content that you're using today or the training in the way you're doing it. Figure out that missing information as part of this and make that part of your actionable plan. Because when you do this, the whole goal of this is to get here. How do I reduce or eliminate restraining forces becomes a list of things that you can do. How do I strengthen or add driving forces? A list of things that you can do. And you can turn that into an action plan about who does what, with whom, and how, by when. And that's how it all really starts to come together and allows you to create and run multi-phased plans, because you don't want to try to boil the ocean, as they say, or you don't want to try to eat the whole elephant at one time. As you look at the system, as the systems thinking and the various building blocks, based on all this analysis you've done up to this point, where do you want to start? What do you want to do next? How many various projects can you run at one time? Maybe if different people are doing them in the organization, because cross-functional collaboration, right? You can do a couple at a time, but you can't do everything at once. No organization can even sustain that level of change for that long. So put together your phased plans based on priorities, and now you are working toward a formal maturity model where the things that you're doing are going to layer and add up and change sales results. I've seen it
Mike, I
happen
had a
time and again.
question. I had a
Yeah,
question
Lance.
for you. Just when you're talking about this analysis and the force field analysis, and I can see how that's feeding into deciding what you're going to prioritize for the building blocks. In your experience, how many folks are involved in this analysis? Is it one person, two people? Is it the whole team, all hands on deck? What does it take to actually get to the point where you've got this action plan that you can execute?
I'm going to give you the consultant answer on that, Lens. Right? The answer is it depends. I have been a single sales enablement person inside a company. I have been a leader of a 30-person department inside a company. I have had 5 people that I was working with cross-functionally in some companies or clients, and I've had 50 people that I had working cross-functionally in others. So you have to be adaptable to the situation. Um, uh, I would try to not be one person carrying all the balls, right? Which is why you want to do cross-functional. So if I'm doing a project that's related to buyer engagement content, I'm going to engage the marketing team, maybe even product marketing, whoever is putting together the messaging. And I'm going to get some people in sales involved in that so that they can vet it, because unfortunately, about 60% or more of the content that marketing organizations produce do not get used by the sales team, because the sales team doesn't believe it's accurate or is what the customer really needs. So you get teams together for each of these little pockets that you're trying to improve, and you have to do that based on the context that you're in. So a couple people per project probably keeps it from becoming one of those massive snowballs that moves about, the speed of a turtle, right? So I would try to keep it lean. I would try to keep it thin and focused. I would try to involve the right people, and and have somebody actually own it. In the case where I'm in sales enablement, but I'm working on buyer engagement content, somebody in marketing needs to own that. I can be part of that team. I can guide it. I can be the liaison to sales, but they've got to own that. Now, maybe in my organization, I own training for the sales team. So if it's a training project, I'm going to own it. But if it's a product training piece of it, I'm going to bring the product marketing people or product development into that. I don't know if that helps, but there's no one answer to that, unfortunately. It's really contextual based on what you're working on and who is in the organization that you could work with. Hopefully that helps. That's a slice of reality there.
Thanks. Perfect.
You're very welcome. So create and run multi-phase plan. So what's the bottom line here on take action? You understand the building blocks, develop the best fit charter for your company with who you can work with cross-functionally, get those right bricks in the wall, if you will. You conduct a force field analysis using the situation assessment framework, current state, desired future state, gap and impact analysis, and make sure that you include the building blocks as well as part of your forces. Then you can prioritize based on what matters to your leaders and the other things that we looked at here, and create those action plans to really start to implement things that will either start you right or evolve your sales enablement function to that formal maturity model level. So we've gotten through 2 or 3. It's 3:44. Hang with me here. Next is taking the leap. And this is where, for me at least, it gets fun, because now with these foundations in place, getting the building blocks in place, getting a formal charter and getting engagement, now you can start to go beyond the basics and evolve to performance consulting. Probably requires that we define that, right? And I think you're probably pretty clear on this, being in the program that you've been in. But this is really, for me, it's a systematic and holistic approach to improving workplace performance. And you get this, right? It's grounded to analytics and diagnostics, and you want to get the root causes. You're really now thinking of a broad array of organizational and individual factors that influence human performance. It's not just messaging or training or tools anymore. Now you're really thinking about, how do I select, design and develop the most appropriate solution that's going to target that root cause problem that you just figured out? And then how do I implement this in some proven effective way to get adoption and to drive change? And it's one of the things that makes sales enablement leaders groan when I say it out loud. But this work that we do in performance consulting or sales enablement, it's really organizational change management. Because if you can't drive change in an organization or build the environments that foster it and guide people and lead them to it, this is what kills companies. Right? First of all, they often don't have the vision that they need to change. We're seeing a lot of that in the current marketplace in the sales profession. But even when they see it, they often stumble on actually driving and actualizing the change that they want. Right? So this implementation piece is so critical. As a consultant, one of the banes of my existence in an otherwise really fun and rewarding career has very often been convincing people who are responsible for growing revenue to do the things that would grow revenue. And often it's because they tried something once and it didn't work. Well, they may have tried the exact right thing, but they implemented it so poorly that it had no hope of getting a result. And then a consultant like me comes along and has to try to convince them to go do what they did before, but do it differently. Fun stuff, let me tell you. So you've seen this model, I'm sure, before. This is just one of many. This is the Association for Talent Development's HPI, or Human Performance Improvement Model. All of the models, though, this and ISPI and others, they all have very similar big moving parts. There's a diagnostics and a gap analysis piece. Generally, it gets to root cause analysis. There's a part where you're doing solution design and problem solving. Then you're developing these solutions. You're implementing those solutions with change management, and you measure, evaluate, and adjust to get results. For geeks like for me, any of you that like to get into some reading, I've dropped some other things you can go take a look at there, right? But this concept of using these big moving parts, whichever model you prescribe to, is what really matters. And this is, for me, where it starts to get real with sales enablement. Because if you look at the focus, outputs, measures, assessments, accountability, and how executives view sales enablement and sales performance consulting. By the way, executives probably don't even use those terms often, sales enablement, sales performance consulting. But conceptually, they'll look at a sales enablement function, and the focus of it is basically it's leading initiatives and projects. Where we need to get it to is addressing performance issues. The outputs for many sales enablement teams, There are activities. It's, hey, I got that messaging in place. Oh, we did this nice training course. Oh, we're now using these software tools. What you need to get to is that those things that you're doing are actually resulting in performance improvement. In terms of measures, a lot of sales enablement groups measure the progress of those initiatives above in their projects. Where we need to get to is measuring performance change and ROI. For an enablement, very often the assessments are how much the sales force uses their outputs. So how often are people taking this course? How often is this piece of content being used? How often do people use this tool, as opposed to how much the sales force improves because of those things? From an accountability standpoint, enablement is often held accountable to delivering these things to the sales force. What they're not often enough held accountable to is delivering better sales productivity. And key one, how do the executives view the function? If you're doing the things, just doing the things on the left, you are generally viewed as a cost or a cost center. If you do the things on the right, you have an opportunity to be seen of as an investment. And yes, Lenz, I caught your comment there, right? This is very similar to how traditional L&D departments are viewed, and what they need to do to move toward more of a performance orientation. No different with sales enablement. That's a good call out. Now, what's interesting as you look at this, though, people very often think it's an either or proposition. It's either you are this thing on the left, you're this thing on the right, or you're at some sliding scale in between. And to that, I would say, that's not exactly reality. Reality goes a little bit different, where you're actually looking at those two things as separate scales. You're not going to live and produce results in sales enablement if you're not leading initiatives and projects. You have to do that, and you're somewhere on a sliding scale of how well you do that. Those projects have to deliver, as we talked about, addressing performance issues. You're somewhere on that. So each of these actually has two scales, right? Yes, you have to measure the progress of initiatives and projects, and you have to measure and report on how the performance change is occurring and what the return on investment is. It's not either or, except for this one. I've never seen an executive group view an enablement function or any other function as both a cost center or an investment. Where you want to get to is they see you as an investment. This is actually another thing that you could use as a diagnostic tool on your own department internally. Now, bring that back to force field analysis. We said originally that your situation assessment in the building blocks would be part of your sources of forces. However, when you start to move toward performance consulting, now you're looking at broader things. You're looking at economic forces, market forces, your buyer and customer acumen, product and solution challenges. You know, sometimes products and solutions need to be improved for the organization to go beyond its current state. Sales enablement doesn't typically even talk about that or bring that up, right? And it's not easy to do that either in organizations, but if you're acting as a performance consultant, you at least attempt to have those conversations. If not, then you'll always be limited as to how well you can drive results based on other limitations in the organization. And you may not be able to change those things. So at some point, you have to have the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, as the saying goes. But if you understand those factors, you will know what some of your limitations are. You know, talent and expertise forces, sales effectiveness acumens and fundamentals, other things that are in the sales performance ecosystem, you can start to look broader than the things that we looked at the first time. And you're still trying to drive them with a force field analysis into a great action plan. But now you're broadening the scope to really trying to get to the root of the larger organizational performance issues. To do that, there are a bunch of tools that can help. And I'm guessing you've been introduced to some of these already based on my conversations with Steve and Lentz. The one on the far left is actually something that we use in a coaching course that we adapted from Ferdinand Forney's work. You know, what are the conditions? What are the reasons someone isn't performing? What's the best solution? I'm sure you're familiar with Gilbert's behavioral engineering model. On the right, I've inserted Megger and Pipe's performance analysis flowchart, which really did me a lot of good early in my career after I landed upon that. And there's a bunch more of these things in the appendix and links where you can go check them out and sort of explore them on your own as you go. Okay, where are we here? So I've also provided some links here about other things you can explore. You probably have looked at this as part of your programs as well. But there's links here to performance consulting, HPT, HPI, TQM, total quality management. Business process management is huge, especially in sales. Having and developing in yourself and your sales force the financial and business acumen needed to have executive level conversations and all the other things that you see here. I got a green belt in Six Sigma back in 2007. Did me a world of good on some of the projects that I was working on. I see some of you have to leave and you're thanking me. Thank you for being here. And it's rewarding to hear this might be helpful. Keep in mind, I know that I've thrown a lot at you, and this is done purposely to give you some value and things to chew on. So good luck with that. You may have seen these books as well as part of your curriculum at some point, but I put together a list of things that I found helpful for me as I was learning and trying to figure out how to move the needle. So you'll have a bunch of that in there as well. And the bottom line for all of this in this section, keep the building blocks running. You can't ignore those now because you've reached the formal maturity model level. Learn performance consulting practices to get to that adaptive maturity model. Assess where you are, where you want to be, plan to close the gaps and execute. Work on becoming that diagnostician in the problem solver. Diagnose first, then prescribe, one of my favorite sayings. Continue your learning journey over time. I'm still learning things every single day. The second I think that I've actually got something figured out, something else happens that I have to learn about. So, you want to be a lifelong learner and focus everything that you can on delivering outcomes. I can't tell you what a difference that has made in my career personally. I learned some of this stuff early on, and I didn't realize that not everybody was doing it. People were counting butts in seats, as they say, and doing level 1 reaction surveys and training. I was talking about the ROI I was delivering. I didn't find out till years later that that wasn't commonplace. If you focus on delivering outcomes and applying these things in ways to serve your organizations, it will do wonders for your career. So brings us right back to the story about sales training. Sales training is great, training is great, but performance consulting will help you take things to a different level entirely. So there is a ton of information for you to dig into in the appendix, but I really want to thank you for being here, and I hope this has been helpful. Lenz, I know that you said you'd keep an eye on things. Was there anything else that came in that we want to answer or address?
Seeing no other questions in the chat, so if anyone does have maybe a last question or comment, you can feel free.
How does sales enablement view the relationship between sales and marketing? How do you know when it's working? How do you fix it when it's broken? Yeah, that is the $64,000 question, as the old game show used to say. It is still, unfortunately, somewhat of a competition and a dart throwing exercise between sales and marketing. It's not working when marketing leads aren't followed up on, when marketing content isn't being used, and when they have a we-they argument constantly back and forth between the two functions. I don't know that the concept of chief revenue officer and revenue enablement is quite the answer yet, but I like the concept of bringing the two functions together under a central executive. Now, if you just do that and make an org chart change, that's not going to accomplish anything. But if you put those two functions under someone who truly understands both of them, they can begin to bring people together have dialogue. And to me, the thing that fixes it the fastest is a joint focus on the buyers and customers. If it were up to me, I would have sales and marketing not report to a chief revenue officer or a sales and marketing person. I would have them both report to, along with customer service or customer success, a chief customer officer. Because when the business and when the people take a buyer-centric, customer-centric, other-centric approach, it's a lot like that corny old Zig Ziglar saying, you get what you want in life when you help enough others get what they want. And when you can focus on the customer and deliver what they need, radically satisfy them, develop a great buying experience, customer experience, service experience, everyone tends to rally around that. And that's what I've seen bring sales and marketing together. What's the best piece of advice for someone trying to break into sales enablement from the outside? There is a weird thing in sales where everybody in sales thinks that you have to have sales experience to do sales enablement. I happen to have it, so my path was a little easier, but I do know people who have broken in, and they've broken in by being able to learn to talk the language as if they had been in sales. They study it, they understand process and methodology, they talk to salespeople and really understand the challenges that they face. They really inculcate themselves into it. And you can do this from within inside an organization, and slide yourself into that kind of a role. A lot of people in enablement come from sales, but a lot of others come from sales training or marketing, sometimes even tech. So you do it by really learning how to speak the language, understanding the problems that they face, and doing that same thing I just said we should do with our customers. You get what you want by helping enough others get what they want. Hopefully that's a good thought. All right, did I miss anything? No, I think I think we got everything. And yes, I would, Steve, I'd be really happy to introduce you to, I think you mean the Sales Education Foundation. And I will do that later today or tomorrow. Folks, thank you for, thanks for the thanks. I hope this has been great. Lenz and Steve, it was a real honor and pleasure to come and do this for the team. And if anyone has follow-up questions, I'm completely open to people reaching out to me or reaching out through you. I'd be happy to write something up to respond to those answers so it could be shared with others. You let me know if anything comes up, and I'll be here to support you.
Oh, Steve, you're on mute.
Thanks, Lenz.
It's bound to happen one time during the presentation.
Glad it was me. Thank everyone for being with us today. Mike, thanks again. We've come to the end of our recording. I'm going to stop it now.